Hello everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. First things first, if you haven't yet, you are welcome to any of the refreshments and snacks over on the side table. There's free beer and wine as well as some crackers and stuff, so if you want something to drink and munch on while the panel's going, now's your time. Before we start, I would just like to give a thanks to Atlas Workbase and everyone that worked here that helped us get this event on its feet. I really appreciate it, as does everyone at Prison Scholars. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Techstars and Chase Bank and the Seattle Startup Week. They are what made this event possible, so thank you. Another thing is that we'll be having a sign-in sheet in the back left corner over there. If you are interested in learning more about what the Prison Scholar Fund does, at the end, if you want to share your email or whatever info you're comfortable with, it'll be back there after the event. So yes, I'm Grace Novacek. I am an intern at the Prison Scholar Fund. As you can see, we have quite a large panel here. So that makes my job a little bit more difficult, but I'm still very excited. So if you could all do me a favor and just hold your questions and comments until the last 30 minutes, we'll be doing an audience question portion. So yeah, that'll be great. If we could just go right now, we're just going to go along and have each of the panelists introduce themselves, and as an icebreaker, just share what you did for fun when you were in prison and what you do for fun now. So whoever wants to start first.
Okay, I'll just use this mic. I'm technically challenged anyway. So. My name is James Jackson, but people call me JJ. And in prison, what I did for fun, that's really kind of I don't know about that question, but I did a lot of physical fitness, but I think how I entertained myself more, what I have fun doing was playing dominoes, right? So what do I do for fun today? When I get the opportunity, I like to take a road trip or go hiking or possibly camping if I can. And I work out, although I kind of fell off a little bit and gained 15 pounds since winter. but
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle McClendon, and what I did when I was incarcerated was I figured out how to become the best hair braider ever. Because if you learn how to braid hair, you get all the extra oranges, whatever they don't want, And not only that, but I learned how to be creative with braiding. Not just, not just being able to braid, but just thinking about how to connect the dots with braiding. And that was very interesting for me, and it also gave me the ability to think beyond the mouse looking in a trap box for cheese. So that's how I thought about braiding. Eventually there would be a way out of this situation. What I do for fun today is I am a barrier buster, so I like pissing people off and impacting and making changes.
I love this gal. That's what I do for fun. My name is Zachary Kinnaman, and what I did for fun is I became a weight deck fiend at the institution that I was incarcerated in, and kind of culminated in a whole group of very young guys and myself. I was 54 when I finally bench pressed 250 pounds 5 consecutive times at the weight deck, and you should have heard the cheering. So it probably was one of the reasons why I recently survived a heart attack. And what I do for fun now is I'm with her. I like to piss people off in Olympia and remind them that we have a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do
change our criminal justice system and mass incarceration.
Hi, my name is Dirk Van Velzen, and I direct the Prison Scholar Fund. And when I was incarcerated, what I really did for fun was I took a lot of school classes. So I spent almost all my time in education. But also, the fun part of that was actually kind of working out in the weight room too. So I had a little bit of weight room experience. But part of that too, we kind of watched a little bit of TV. So we'd watch those CrossFit competitions, and we'd watch these things called these Spartan races. And it was the craziest thing I ever saw, people carrying buckets of gravel uphill. And it didn't look like any fun at all. So of course, now that I'm out of prison, I had to go do that. So I do the Spartan races, and we have a couple of Spartan people here in the crowd, so thanks for coming. And the fun part, instead of being in school all day, now I'm trying to build an organization. So that's crazy, and it's a little bit fun.
Hello, my name's Eugene Day. I'm from California. What I did for fun when I was in prison, I spent a lot of time also taking college classes, but I spent a lot of time in the law library learning how to litigate. I used to pretend I was a lawyer, and I used to win once in a while. And I spent almost all my time in there, either publishing articles, trying to win habeas corpus, and it was my passion. And this was in the heart of the era of mass incarceration, like the gentleman down the way said. So, and what I do for fun now is I'm putting my money where my mouth is. You know, I was real quick to point out the problems when I was inside. So now, as evidenced by me coming up here to Seattle and other places, I'm having a blast leading from the front. Thank you.
My name is Chris Beasley. I'm an assistant professor at University of Washington, Tacoma, and co-founder of the formerly incarcerated College Graduates Network, which is a network started up a few years ago, really grown since last year. When I was in prison, I never really knew how to make like iced mochas or anything like that before I went in. But I got lucky one time. I was at one place and we had ice, and that was really cool. And I had money on the books, so I could get instant milk, I could get instant coffee, and I had Carnation instant cocoa. And I figured out I could make like iced mochas. I sort of just figured out how to make something tasty, because the instant coffee, it's not the best stuff, but I flavored it up, right? And so one of the things that I do for fun now is I make like iced mochas and stuff. I mean, now I have like an espresso maker and all that, but I sort of carried over some of that, what I learned, just like Dirk with the Spartan race, sort of carried over some of what I learned from prison and try to do that for fun now.
Hi, good evening. I'm David Israel. Well, when I was incarcerated, I guess I took the time to learn a lot about myself and people, and I started teaching business classes in where I was at, and my experience led me to taking a product that I saw some popcorn being made in minimum security. I wrote a business plan and launched a company when I came home. And what I do for fun is I run these companies.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for the introductions and the fun anecdotes. Just going to go ahead and start off by just talking about what you guys do for work now. Most of us in the audience know that it's extremely difficult to be an entrepreneur in any capacity, and I'm just wondering if you guys can elaborate what it was like being an entrepreneur or an artist or an organizer with that added barrier of difficulty of having just come out of being incarcerated.
I'll start. I think it becomes a necessity because there's so many barriers. When you come home, there weren't a lot of jobs available. There are just tons of potholes. So for me, the only way I was going to be able to earn a living and really support my family was to start a business. And it happens a lot with a lot of guys that I see. Now we go back into the prisons and we're doing entrepreneurial programs, and there's a lot of really smart guys. So yeah, I think we come out and you don't think you can do things, but it becomes a necessity to figure out how to be an entrepreneur for a lot of us.
Yeah, I also think about sort of like some of the things that led us to go to prison, right? And, for me, it was like sort of not really feeling like I was part of sort of monolithic society, right? Sort of have this like antisocial behavior. term that we have for some of the things that we do, right? But if you don't feel like you're part of the society, is it really antisocial, right? So some of us sort of end up in that way of life, sort of doing the things that we do because we don't feel like we're part of something. And, you know, you go to prison and you're sort of just even further marginalized, right? And sort of ostracized from society. So some of the work that I do in community organizing is because of like that identity that I have, right? And that's, I'm part of something as I do that work, as I do this community organizing, right? I see other formerly incarcerated college graduates. We can all identify with one another and sort of feed off that shared identity that we have. So I know this question was probably more at like some of the challenges, but I also think, you know, it is a challenge, right, that we sort of are further marginalized, but it creates some opportunities if we sort of seize on that identity a little bit and bond with others and do some work around that.
Let's see. When I was inside, I came up with an idea that offenders should be given the chance to be counselors when they're inside so that they could become subject matter experts on why they went to prison, and so that they could, through their intern work or their clinical work, that they could give back while they're inside. So I was doing a life sentence under 3 strikes in California. And I really had no opportunity. I really had no idea when or if I'd ever get out. But I came up with the idea because I believed it was the right thing to do. It's an idea I came up with, and I'd never let it go. And then somewhere in that process, around 2012, the laws began to change. Mass incarceration started going a little bit in the other direction. So as I was preparing to get out, I basically put together a business plan, and I pitched it to a nonprofit who agreed to, if I got out, they would fund my idea. So basically, ever since I got out in 2013, I've been going back in. I've been training offenders to be counselors. I've been working with them in their reentry, and I have a few other endeavors I work in. I don't really do the legal work like I mentioned earlier. It was like a hobby, but now I still do some freelance writing. But mostly what I'm doing right now, because California has become almost like the epicenter of reform, because we were really the most unjust state with their myriad sentencing laws that were draconian, and they really pretty much was the center of mass incarceration. So really what I'm doing now is I'm working with a number of nonprofits, and I have my own consulting company, and I'm just basically working in the field, and there's this huge need for ex-offenders to be working in this field as well. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird, but, while I was incarcerated, I went pretty far in my education, and then when I was getting closer and closer to getting out, I couldn't imagine that anybody would hire me with a really great skill set just because I was a prisoner. So my obvious options were entrepreneurial endeavors, whatever that was. I was kind of balancing between a for-profit, some kind of company, and I didn't really have an idea what that would look like. But then also, I had started the Prison Scholar Fund in 2006 while I was incarcerated, which is kind of a hobby, but then I kind of decided that could actually be what I really do for a living. And of course, I'm really passionate about opening that opportunity for other people. So I kind of thought that might be a good idea. And it's kind of funny because as the years had went by, prisoner education or criminal justice reform started becoming more popular. So when I got out of prison in 2015, I thought I was going to really face a lot of headwinds. But all of a sudden, it's like a really neat thing people were talking about. Obama went to a prison, Zuckerberg went to a prison. Who had a concert at the Washington prison just recently?
Common.
Yeah, Common had a concert, and so did John Legend. That's what I was thinking of. So all of a sudden, it's really, this prison reform stuff is kind of popular. So we're making some progress, but still, being an entrepreneur running a startup, nonprofit is tough because we're not raising money for kitty cats and firefighters. We're trying to raise money for convicts, and that's tough. So even though there's a huge benefit on the backside, it's still really hard. But that's what makes it fun.
Oh, well, when I came out of prison, there we go. Okay. So when I came out of prison, I had gone into prison as an attorney in the state of Washington. And obviously I was not going to be allowed to practice law. And so I was very fortunate that my family owned a thoroughbred racehorse farm in Kentucky. And I immediately went to work as a farmer, simple laborer. and my wife and I once went to dinner in a little town called Paris, Kentucky, in Bourbon County, and we had a terrible plate of fish. The fish was appalling, and I had had enough wine that I looked at the guy and said, "I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I want to see the chef because I'm going to tell him all about salmon." I didn't know anything about salmon, and the next thing I know, I'm committing to shipping this guy fresh salmon from the Pacific Northwest. I get in the car, and my wife looks at me and goes, "You don't know anything about fish. What did you do?" And I said, "What did I do?" So long and short of it is I formed a little company that distributed Pacific Northwest seafood products in the Louisville, Cincinnati, and Lexington area. I had 2 employees, a truck. I closed it down in 2015 to return to the Northwest, and I loved what I did. I can tell you that the hardest thing in the world is to run a restaurant because I was their supplier, and the one person that they don't short is the guy with the fresh fish, if fresh fish is on the menu. So the biggest barrier I found to my entrepreneurial spirit was that I was afraid that somebody would find out that I had been formerly incarcerated. And so it's been very interesting over the last 10 years to kind of not lead with the fact that I spent time in the joint, but now I take a different tack, come out of the closet, so to speak, and say, if you think you don't know an ex-felon, guess who's next to you? And it shakes people up because they're not expecting a person like myself or anybody on this panel. I don't know what they're expecting, but what I do find interesting is the last thing they expect to do is to see people with carrying on their own businesses, making money, being a part of the system in the best and absolutely most American way, which is to work for yourself and build something. So I'm really happy to see all these people here, and know David and some of the other panelists, and it's very exciting.
I would say that one of the things that my experience was being incarcerated and how it impacted me where I am today is that one experience was one thing, and that's what made me change my whole perspective. I was incarcerated, and I just got there, and I needed a kite. And so while I was in, I was like, okay, there's the pencils over there and the kites over here. Okay, and this is what I do, and I go put the kite, in the little drop box, right? Well, there's a big yellow bold line that goes across the floor. And so my CEO was like, "Get back behind the line, Jenkins McClendon." And I'm like, "Yes," she said both names. I love it. And because my name is hyphenated. And so anyways, I was standing there, and I'm like, "Oh, okay," because it freaked me out, right? So I'm like, "Oh, okay." But she was explaining to me, "Well, you can't come above, you can't go past this line if you need to talk to me or whatever." And honestly, I said, "You know what? I apologize. I'm so sorry. I just got here. They didn't give me any instructions. They didn't give me a handbook. They didn't tell me what the rules were. I have no idea of what's going on." By me responding that way, that led me being in the hole for 6 days, and I was labeled as belligerent and not cooperative. I just got here. Sorry. Don't know how this goes. Anyways, that experience led to me saying it's my responsibility to educate myself holistically. Not just with, I have to educate myself, mind, body, soul, and wellness, period. I wasn't going to get it in there, and this was something I was used to having it because I had it before. That's where I come from. But that experience changed the whole narrative of my situation, right? So with that being said, I was able to, once I got out, I was able to educate myself, get in school, get involved in my community, and that led me to saying, okay, if we educate ourselves and learn the terminology in their language, then we can fight fair. If you're not educated, and if you don't know the terminology, if you don't know their language or don't speak their language, then you can't fight fair. So for me, being able to educate myself and educate others, and now being in a position to where I can change laws and empower and impact others, I can fight fair because now I understand.
So I would just say for my story is that I was an entrepreneur at 12 years old. I just was selling stuff that the government didn't like me selling. So, that said, you know, my story is of drug dealing, incarceration, addiction, you know, a lot of these different things that come with that. And so going to prison and stuff, for me, you know, you don't get any kind of rehabilitation. And so I decided to rehabilitate myself because I was tired and everything. And one of the things that really has happened for me coming out of prison and having a lot of that self-healing in prison is I don't deal in shame and guilt with myself, and I'm super open with my story and what I have found out. So I learned in prison that I could learn, right? And so I knew I wanted to go to college when I got out, but I also got like super fit in prison, and I found out you could actually get a degree in personal fitness, right? And so that's what I wanted to do when I got out, is just get an AAS in personal fitness and go start my career. But coming into Highline College over there, my first year, I spent just kind of going to class, going to the gym, going there, and then I wanted to go to some summer classes, and I needed some funding, so I went to Workforce, where Michelle works today, and I met the counselor over there and told her my story, because I'm open about my story. I don't hide that, right? And she's like, you need to be in student leadership. And I'm like, really? I'm like, I'm a little old and they're a little square. I don't know about that, right? But she's all, no, JJ, you're perfect for it. You'd be perfect for it. Long story short, I did that. I got into student leadership. My first job was in multicultural affairs and stuff, working in the Intercultural Center, building programs, right? Programs that are all social justice based, and I got a lot of training in how to build those programs and how to facilitate those programs. And so from there, student government came to me and said, JJ, we have a legislative breakfast coming up, and we want you to come and tell your story. And so I kind of got to give you that real quick, and I'm trying not to be too long here. But so every year in the community college system, 34 community technical colleges come together at WACSA. It's a student association, and they put together a legislative agenda, right? And on that legislative agenda was post-secondary education for inmates. And so they asked me to share at this legislative breakfast, where legislators come from the districts that Highline touches to listen to student concern. And so they came, I told my story, and it blew up from there, right? Next thing I know, I'm being invited down to Olympia to give a speech on the Rotunda. I'm testifying my story in committee. Then I find myself at the state symposium for post-secondary education for inmates with professional staff and faculty from my school. And we said, man, we need a reentry program at Highline to support these students, because in Washington State, reentry is huge. It's so ripe right now. The governor handed down a proclamation for all state institutions to assist in any way they can in reentry, right? And so now with that bill passing, it eventually passed. We worked on it for like 3 years, and it passed, right? And so now that opens up the institutions to the 2-year colleges, and students can now get up to a 2-year degree anyway. So they're going to be coming out of these schools, and they need transition help coming into our campuses, right? And so I've been working for the last 2 years to we put together a committee to bring this program to our school. This summer they hired me to finish building the framework for that program. I had to move on because I'm going on with my education. I'm now at the Evergreen State in a bachelor's program, but that's really, so it wasn't anything that I was like looking to do, but me sharing my story and being open about it brought these opportunities and opened way more doors than ever closed for me. And also it changed a lot of people's minds at that school about, and we don't like to, I'm going to say, formerly incarcerated people and who we are and what we can achieve. So.
Thank you so much for sharing. The next thing that we're going to talk about is about your transition. So in my eyes, I see all of you as people who have successfully transitioned from being incarcerated to back into society, so to speak. And I know that that's not an easy thing to do. So I just wanted to pry. What do you think prepared you for that transition while you were in prison, and what do you feel like was missing?
I don't think anything in prison prepared me for transition. They didn't. Well, not back then. I came out in 2007. I think it's different now. I mean, now they are really starting to put a lot of efforts into getting guys and women ready to go back into society and to be prepared so they can get jobs. And we're doing a lot of things out here to help people have a successful reentry. Yeah, it was pretty challenging. I mean, I didn't know the barriers. I didn't know anything. I mean, I just knew that I was going to have a problem. I didn't know what that looked like, and I didn't know all of the ones that existed because I had no clue. You know, you think about as a person coming out, you think about what are people going to think? Can I get a job? Will people talk to me? How will I earn money? But there was a lot of roadblocks, and I think today it's again. I mean, he was talking. The state of Washington is ripe for transition, and there's a lot of groups coming together, including the one that Zach and I served on together, to help guys and gals be successful as they get back into society.
I think I agree with that. Like, looking back, there wasn't a whole lot that prepared me to transition. Maybe the fact that I had sort of lost some of the respect that I'd gotten sort of in the drug manufacturing dealing world and stuff. Like, everybody likes to be important and sort of be respected, right? We all find that in different ways. And I'd sort of lost some of that in my time in prison, so wanted to sort of get something in life. But there wasn't really that opportunity for transformation and hope. And I think hope is something that's missing. We look at the research. I did a study on hope, and it was the second study ever done on hope and reincarceration, right? How does no one ever look at hope and its influence on whether people go back to prison, right? It's because we don't pay attention to that, right? We only pay attention to the risk factors for reincarceration, not the assets that people have. And same thing in prison. We focus on the basic needs on reentry, but not in instilling hope and transformation in people. And I think we need more of that. We need not only opportunities for people, but stories like ours inside of there, so that our brothers and sisters behind us know that they don't have to live up to the social narrative about what an incarcerated and formerly incarcerated person is, right? We're not just people that continue to commit crime, continue to go back to prison, right? That's the story. And yet when we look at the data, about half of people don't follow that same trajectory, right? Yet we know nothing about that. And so I think we need our stories back in there so our brothers and sisters see different opportunities for themselves. They see themselves as business leaders. They see themselves as professors. And I know formerly incarcerated college presidents, directors of like federal institutions, right? We need more of that, I think, in prison.
Thank you. Of the many hats I wear, one of them is transition specialist, and for a couple of nonprofits. And so there's one of the things I think of when I think of reentry and transition is, how I experienced it myself. And when I was inside, I never prepared to get out because I didn't know if or I was going to get out. So I didn't want to prepare for an event that might not happen. But I spent so much time working on me. Like, you can't give what you don't have. Like in the self-help world and the counseling world, the rehabilitative world, the people who are best positioned to help people, who help through their own experiences, and they've worked enough on themselves that they can carve a path. So what was key for me, because I was a recidivist, I had gone back to prison. So while I'm in there for my recidivist lifestyle, I think to myself sometimes, if I got out, how could I know for sure I wouldn't come back? So what I did is I spent most of my time working on mainstream talents, freelance writing, brief writing, and then I started doing clinical work. And when I started doing work, when I started building programs around helping others and how I would learn to help others is I'd learn to help myself first. So if I became my best student in the world of self-help, so to speak, then I'm, for one, I'm definitely qualified to lead the way for someone else to help themselves. And then at the same time, when I finally got out, I kind of shifted my focus at first, and I started helping people re-enter in my free time, because I was going back into institutions to work, And so it kind of created a void in my life because I wanted to help people re-enter, because I was successfully re-entering, like the moderator mentioned, that most of us say, could you say that we have successfully re-entered. So when I started actually helping parolees re-enter, especially long-term offenders like myself, is when it started making more sense. So I could really sit in a room, not as big as this perhaps, but sit in a room in a counseling session and explain to them that what you're experiencing. And I've already heard a few people speak on it. When you come out, you're like a blank slate. You're like a child. Especially the longer you've been down, the longer it takes to decompress, like say a scuba diver. And when I can sit in a room of grown men, real big, strong alpha males, and explain to them, hey, it's normal to feel like this, to feel vulnerable, to feel scared. When you can share those experiences with them, it means a lot. So one of the ways that I can ensure my transition to reentry is permanent is by staying in this business. And my experiences I'm able to share with others really reinforces most of what I've learned about myself, and then I learned a lot more about myself by being married. So then my wife teaches me a whole bunch more about myself. So it's just, for me, it's an unending journey, being able to just experience life and bring those experiences back to guys who need the help, who need the mentoring and the leadership. So that's where I'm at in my reentry.
Yeah, the way I look at it is really kind of a mental aspect and a mechanical aspect. I was probably in prison for maybe 2 or 3 years before I really decided that maybe I shouldn't commit crimes anymore. I was just kind of figuring out how to do it better. It's like in my case, my partner got caught, he got 1 year, I got 15. So I was like, well, I just won't have a partner anymore. I'll just kind of do it differently. So it wasn't so much that I was doing the wrong thing, I was just doing it the wrong way. So then, once education got good to me, I kind of changed my mind. And then that's kind of the mental part. You kind of decide where you want to go and what you should or shouldn't be doing. And then the mechanical part is when you actually get out, where are you going? So that was really important for me because I wanted some scholarship funding. The moment I got out, I had a place to live. I went to the UW. I had family support to buy clothes. I had a girlfriend to drive me around and get my driver's license. Like all these little things, right? But it's a big deal. So I put that in contrast to a guy I knew, his name was Riley, and he was one of the guys I worked out with, and we'd walk around the track every day. And he was really worried because he only had a couple years to do, and he's getting out in like a year and a half. So him and I talked for a year and a half on what he was going to do when he got out. And he's going back to North Everett or someplace in Everett and back to the hood. And I was like, well, so why is that a problem? Because he didn't have his head right yet, and he's going back to his mom's house, so he had a place to live, but he was still in the hood, and he couldn't not walk outside the door and get back in the Everett drug meth gang or whatever. So we kind of parted ways, and I got out and he got out, and then within months he was back in. But he knew he was going back. I mean, and there was nothing I could do to talk him out of it. They're like, dude, just don't go outside and hang out with those dudes. I mean, how tough is that, right? Just don't do it. But he just couldn't do it. So there's a lot to it. It's like you need a place to go, you need your head right, and in my case, education really changed my life. So that's why I'm so passionate about doing this for other people.
Well, when I came out, it was the same year that David came out, and I kind of feel the same way. There really wasn't any sort of transition inside other than they made everyone go to a resume and interview process, and I was like, okay, I've done this. I actually employed people. I don't really need this, but I went through it and I realized how inadequate it is. I taught school. It was one of my great passions, and I worked also with trying to get the post-secondary education. And I'd like to tell a real quick story about what I think is stuck with me. Now, as an attorney, one of the things most of us who practice law think we're pretty powerful. If there's any attorneys out here and you deny that, no, come on, let's be honest with each other. We often think we're the smartest people in the room. And going into prison, the first thing they told me was, through the informal grapevine, start practicing law here, Kinnaman, and you're going to Airway Heights. I was at Cedar Creek. That's 285 miles away from my family. So I learned. First learning experience. They then said, what are you going to do? You're not going to fight forest fires at the age of 50. You're going to do something else. So I taught school. And they said, you're going to be a math teacher. I said, I don't know math. I'm a history guy. I said, no, you're a math teacher. So I had a math class, and I had to learn high school algebra all over again. Now, that's kind of hard to then go and try to teach it. But what they always say about teachers, those that can't do teach. So I'm living proof that you can actually do some good doing that. Because I had guys that finished in the top percentile of the DOC system repeatedly in our math classes. We had a little class. And at the end of my term, at least it was our practice in our institution, that you don't tell people when you're going home. You just sort of disappear the next day. So I told my math circle, which was a group of guys, there were some people that were really good, and there were some people that were never, ever going to pass the GED. And the one individual that struck me the most was when I said, okay, guys, this is our last class. I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm going home. And there was a dead silence, and this young man who would never get past the 2 times 2 table looked up at me and said, who's going to take care of us? So when I left the next day, I looked back and I started to tear up because there was unfinished business. I had made an impact on individuals that I had never, ever made practicing law. I helped a guy get, just one more, helped a young man named Manny Hernandez, and he was about 6 feet 2 inches tall, big, heavy, he could bench press 400 pounds at the weight deck. He made me look weak. So Manny was in one of my math classes, and I knew that the GED results were out, but I didn't know what the results for him was. So I'm walking across the quad. Here comes Manny. All of a sudden, he's looking really stern at me, and I thought, oh God, he failed. And he comes over, and his arms go out, and he grabs me, and he says, I did it. I passed. It was all your responsibility. He was just gushing. And I looked at him and pushed him back, and I said, no, you did this. I didn't do that. I was there to help you. So when I left, I saw Manny waving at the gate as we left with my family and went back home. And that stuck with me. And it took me we had a farm, we had responsibilities. I had to go to Kentucky. When I came back, I started wondering, what am I going to do to change this awful system? We don't take care of our own citizens in this country the way we should. So I started wandering around. I wound up going down to Olympia to testify on the ombuds position. And I suddenly said, this is where I should be. This is how we can give back. We need to make this transition program work in the state of Washington and other states. We have to take it seriously. And I'm surprised at the number of politicians and legislators that are actually doing that. So,
what helped prepare me for transitioning out was really, like everybody else, I think we all agree, was really nothing. There was no plan of action. There was no next steps. What do you do? Where do you go from here? But personally, my plan for not returning was that would help me to decide while I was in there and being able to get ready to be released was I know that I never, ever, ever want to come back here. I am a goal digger, GOAL. And there's nothing in this place that I have in common with, considering the fact that I'm with incarcerated women. 4 months go by, and she, my cellie, I see her from, she may have been moved to one side, but I'm like, wait a minute, you've been in here the same amount of time. Why are you pregnant? Yeah, I'm looking at y'all. I need some help. If she's incarcerated with me, how she ended up pregnant? Right, not by me. Exactly. So I knew that I didn't want to be an unwed incarcerated mom. I mean, and this is the reality that we deal with. I knew that I didn't want to be tied to a bed if I was going to have children, and for whatever reason it was incarcerated. I knew I didn't want my feet shackled to a bed while I gave birth when that's supposed to be my bonding time. I knew that I didn't want to go 3 days without sanitary supplies, which we did quite often. And so when you come from a background of where you had those things, I knew that I had a family that loved me. I knew I had support at home. So that mentally, I programmed myself to say, okay, this place literally stinks. The toilet's messed up. I sleep, brush my teeth, toilet, everything in one spot. That's gross. I have OCD, you know? So that's really disgusting. And so that's what gave me said this is not a place for you. I made a mistake. And my mistake was not telling on who I was with. Being from New Orleans, Louisiana, 9th Ward, you don't tell. If I tell, I'm gonna end up dead, right? So that was my crime. And so I think what was missing is once I was released, I went right back to jail as soon as I got out. You know why? Because they released me at 4 a.m. in the morning. I came in jail with the $120 cash on me. And they released me at 4 a.m. with a check. I'm in DuPont. At that time, I lived in Federal Way, Washington. How am I going to get home at 4 a.m. in the morning with no ID and a check? So I hopped 3 different buses and I didn't pay, and the fare guy came. I went right back to jail. Because I was excited to go home to see my family, my husband, my kids, the people who really loved me, the people who really cared about me, the people who wanted really to see me be that person I could be, the people who wanted to see me reach my full potential. The people I was incarcerated with, some of them I'll probably never see again. The CEOs who are there, I'll probably never hear from again. I'll probably never see again. And I hope I do, because of the capacity that I'm in today, which is a whole different arena. I have some things I need to say to them. I have some truth that I need to speak to them. And I give truth to my power. My power liberates me to be free. And I want to be able to share that with everybody. So the end result is what I was missing was a resource to get me to where I needed to be safely. And so I was not offered that. So we need more resources, and there's a lack of it. So for me, even getting out, 20 minutes later, I was back in because I stole a ride on public transportation. So, again, it's resources. When people's needs are met, I mean, if we look at what they do in other countries, the Netherlands, New Zealand, when they're talking about maybe we need to close our jail, maybe we need to look at their model and see what's going on over there. How can we incorporate that here? Whatever they're doing is working, right? So I think it's all about capitalism here, but if we just look at how other people are doing it, it's okay to follow a model. We don't have to be the leaders and the innovators of everything. It's okay. I'm okay with saying I don't know, but you know what? You and I can get there together. So I think that's what it is. It's having resources and having people the same way they hold when you're released, the same way they hold you accountable. I want lawyers, attorneys, prosecutors, everybody to be in the same position. Tell me the truth and help me to hold you accountable. Make me feel comfortable with holding you accountable about my future. Because right now you're telling me about everything that I have to do, where I have to be, what time I need to be there, but you're not giving me the resources to be successful in those areas. So then we recidivate. So with that being said, it's about the resources. We have enough resources here, homelessness, all that stuff. But we need to make sure that it's going into the right places and make sure that it's being spent in the right places.
Whew. So, Michelle, we are the leaders in incarceration. So we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population. And so the system's not set up for us to not come back or to stay. That ain't the thing. It's a capitalist thing, and why would they reform their money, right? So, but my story is that, I did my thing out there in the streets, and I was pretty good at it and pretty successful, and I didn't go to prison until I was 36 years old. And when I went to prison, I went to federal prison. And so that was the first time, and I got hit over the head. They gave me a 10-year mandatory minimum. I'd never been in jail for longer than 30 days before that, right? And I've been doing what I've been doing. So part of that was with the addiction that I mentioned earlier and everything. By the time I got to jail, I was so tired, right? I was so tired and so beat up that in jail, it was just like I didn't want to use anymore, right? I didn't want to get high. I just didn't. It had been lifted, right? It's a miracle. That's a miracle. It's a higher power thing. I'm not a religious person. I'm a spiritual person, but I know a miracle when it happens. But I was angry. I was super angry, right? And so when I got to prison, I started going backwards because couldn't nobody say nothing to me. Anybody say anything to me, I would just take off on them. And so I went up in security level, right? But I did start out, I started out in a FCI low in Safford, Arizona, where they had prison industries, they had a weight pile, they had Eastern Arizona College that actually had a partnership with the prison where they had a business program happening and everything. If you're going to be in prison, that's where you want to be in a place like that. I wasn't there for the education though. I was there to be able to work, so I didn't have to ask anybody for anything and to get on that weight pile. That was my only thing, right? But I didn't have a GED, and you had to get a GED really to get more money at the job. To even stay on that yard, you eventually had to get your GED. And so I didn't think I can learn. I just didn't know. So I got, just to make a long story short, I got my GED, right? And I'll never forget her name, Miss Henderson. She was the instructor. She's all, JJ, your scores are high. You need to go over here to this college program and see. I was like, I'm not here for that. I'm not, that's my whole thing. I'm not here for that, right? But she stayed at me, and I was like, you know what? I ain't got nothing better to do. Let me just take a couple classes, right? And so I took a couple classes. I took cultural anthropology and a marketing class, and it was awesome, right? I had fun. I got 4.0. I was like, wow, I'm actually kind of smart, and everything. But I still had a big anger problem, and so somebody messed with me. I took off. I ended up getting put in the hole for like 6 months until I got transferred to Victorville, California, to the FCI over there. That was a disciplinary yard, and now we in the mix there. It's all Southern California. They have their own West Coast politics down there. It's all on racial lines. All the gangs and everything is in there. But in the midst of that chaos is where I finally started to heal, right? In the middle of that, right? So my education got put on hold, but now it was time for me to heal. And one thing about me is, being in the position I was in on the streets and everything, I was stubborn, and I didn't never fall behind anybody, right? I didn't fall into no gangs. I wasn't a follower, right? I was always a leader. So I didn't never feel any of that pressure or any of that. And so I just did JJ, right? But I was still fighting at first, and I was back there in the hole, and they said, JJ, well, they said, Mr. Jackson, we got a place for you if you want to keep acting like that, right? And so what that is in the federal system is it's the penitentiary, the United States Penitentiary, right? And so all the fighting games and all that's off over there. You walk into a cell with another person with a knife, and whoever comes out comes out. I don't know that from experience, but that's what I understood, right? And so I was like, man, if I go over there, I'm not coming home, because I'm either gonna have to kill somebody or I'm gonna get killed. And with that, you can make it in those places if your mind is right? You can make it through that. But if your mind ain't right and you on like what I was, you ain't gonna make it. So I dropped to my knees back there and I just surrendered. I was like, oh, and I understood that I had to get some humility, right? And so I had to start practicing that. And so I had a little reputation amongst the brothers, right? Because it's amongst our people and everything. And people would drink in the unit, and they would, want to come mess with JJ to get one in, right? And I'd be happy to give it to them. So the first time that somebody did that, after I had this realization that I'm going to die in here, which was my worst nightmare, was to be buried over in that prison yard, right? Was the brother came up, he said, okay, JJ, let's go. I knew what he meant. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? I apologize for whatever I did to offend you. that was the hardest thing I ever did in my life, right? He walked away confused. He's like, walked away mumbling, nah, dude. And I walked into the cell and looked at myself in the mirror, and I was like, you're a punk, you're a B, and all. And I realized at that moment that humility is way harder than punching somebody in their mouth and just going out like that, right? Because it's easy to do that. And so what I learned at that moment was what real strength was, where real strength comes from, being humble, right? And so I started to practice that. And then what happened from there is those men recognized that, and they're like, man, JJ was this, but look what they leave JJ alone. So I got to myself where I was even crossing the racial boundaries and stuff. I could go over here with the white guys, I could go over here with the Latin guys, you know, with the natives, and watch TV and kick it and whatever, right? Because people was like, JJ's just trying to change his life, right? And so then one of the next things that happened for me was taking responsibility for my life, for my decisions, and for everything. And so once I did that, I couldn't be mad at nobody no more. I couldn't be mad at, you know, using drugs at 5 years old and the people that gave me. I couldn't be mad at the teachers. I couldn't be mad at the police, at the judge, you know, at these COs anymore, because I realized that it was me that made those choices and decisions that got me to where I was, right? And that was like 1,000 pounds off my shoulders. I was freed, right? And so that's a huge thing, right? And so then I started forgiving people, right, that I felt that had wronged me and everything. Not calling them up and saying, hey, I forgive you, but in here, in my heart, and letting that stuff go. And all that stuff was how I rehabilitated myself and started walking in that hope and everything, because it wasn't nothing that they were doing in there in the system. I will say this, in the federal prison system, I got 9 months of halfway house, and so as I transitioned, I didn't have to worry about food and a roof over my head. All I had to worry about was getting a job and going to school. I had that in the state. You get $40 and a bus ticket, and so it's really set up against you. So I did have that benefit of that, but it was all it was all cleaning house for me, inside work and everything. And they don't do that for you. Can't, and I don't even know if you can teach that, because that's something that has to come from within. So anyway.
Thank you. Yeah, I think all of us up here can agree that there's a lot missing from what the criminal justice system considers to be rehabilitation. And I know that a lot of audience members haven't had the same experience of being incarcerated, so I wonder if you guys could give us an example of a time that you felt like the system was roadblocking your progress.
That's a long list, but I'll tell you a couple that stood out to me. They have a system to rate you when you leave. Back then it was A, B, C, D. A being the worst, means you need more supervision when you leave. D is the least, and then from a scale of 1 to 15, I believe. So I earned a D3, which means basically just I could be left alone. That's because inside they knew me. They knew I just wanted to get on with my life. I didn't want to. There was probably no way I was coming back when they said goodbye. They knew I wasn't coming back. So I didn't require a lot of supervision. When I got to work release, the prosecutor called my new counselor and convinced her to raise me to an A7. Yeah, so all of a sudden I went from a guy that was going to be mostly unshackled and just go on with life and be with my family to being monitored. And they hooked me up with a community corrections officer, which is like a PO, parole officer sort of. And it seemed like his only job, the only thing he cared about with me was to make sure I didn't work, I didn't leave the county, I didn't spend time with my family, and I didn't have a drug problem, but UAs once a week, strip searches once a week. Their whole goal, in my eyes, was to make me miserable and to cause me to fail. So, and you know what? I think that happens, not a lot, but I think it happens. But I think, again, the tides have turned, and I think they're not allowing that anymore. I'm sure it's still going to happen, because you're going to have these guys that that's who they are, okay, until they're weeded out. But I think now the system is, they don't want to do that. They don't want to be known for that. They're looking at trying to find ways to help people transition and be successful because it's good for the community, right? I mean, you don't want people to go out and go back to crime. I mean, we want to reduce crime rates. We want to lower recidivism. We want people to have a good life if they want it, right? I mean, that's what I see up here on the panel. Like all these stories, you know, I mean, I was in Monroe yesterday speaking, and one of the guys said, you know what? There's a lot of guys in here that they haven't made up their minds yet that they want to change, okay? Everybody on this panel made their minds. They decided that they wanted to change and not go back. That's number one. I mean, we can create jobs, we can create opportunities, but it starts inside. You have to decide you're not going to go down that path. JJ had a revelation, right? Michelle decided. You have to make that decision first. Then they can be successful. So, yeah, you know, that's what I encountered.
I think sort of bouncing off of that, and one of the things that I remember clearly when I went in was sort of like the first job assignment, and I had, you know, even though I had sort of been using drugs and dealing drugs, et cetera, I did have a good job before I went in. I guess if you're going to think about what are the good things about meth, at least for a while, you can sort of work on it until you get so bad where you just don't go in, but you can work on it, right? And so I did good, and you know, I was fairly smart, and so I could learn like the supervisory skills, and so I had like team leadership positions and things like that, right? So I had good, respectable job going in, and there's, you know, when I went in, it's like nobody sort of paid attention to that. There wasn't an assessment of where I was at and what my skills were when they were deciding what job to give me, and they put me washing dishes, right? And there's nothing wrong with starting with that, but you know, at a time when you want that hope, right, to change your life, you want that idea of transforming your life and becoming something instead of sort of trying to lift me up. You know, it was sort of like taking me down a notch. And so I remember that as sort of being a barrier to my life and something that still sticks out to me to this day.
Obstacles. Let's see. When I received a life sentence in 1999, my defense to the judge was like, I'm a drug addict, because I was in there for selling and using drugs. I was like, I'm a drug addict, give me treatment, instead of 26 to life in prison. And I always remember, the judge looked at me, because he was sick of me, because I quasi-represented myself. I was taking a number of stands against 3 strikes, and so I made the sentencing real easy for him. He couldn't wait to get rid of me. So he told me, in his old dry, tired way, he told me, well, Mr. Day, you can get all the rehabilitation you want for the next 26 years in prison. And but I'm a warrior, you know, I mean, I'm not a victim, you know what I mean? So I take responsibility for all the actions that led me to that day, but I knew at that time that he was basically telling me to go F myself, because there was nothing in there. So when I got to prison in 1999, I came to a system which has now been deemed absolutely unconstitutional on every level. So when I entered that system, there was nothing to do but gangbang and run amok and just be violent. There was no hope. Nobody was getting out. So the main obstacle when I got to prison was the system, and California had the most unjust system there was. So I determined to do something about it, and so really the main obstacle was really myself. So eventually I had to okay, the government's wrong, they're mean, they're unjust, but ultimately I got to go do some work with the guy in the mirror, just like many people on this panel have expressed. So so coming into an unconstitutional system, I still had an obligation to work on my own impediments, which, you know, that I created with my own criminal thinking, my criminal values. So, but yeah, so that's kind of like the 2 things that come up for me on that question.
So this is a great question, because I've told it a couple times because it's so funny. Of course, education is really important to me, and in my case, I came from the California system. I was doing a couple years there, and I ended up in the federal system because I had some charges up there too. So coming out of the ultra-violent California system, I ended up in the federal one, and I did something I shouldn't have done, so I ended up in the hole for a couple months, actually about 6 months. But before I went, I kind of figured out that once you're in the hole, you can have visits like everybody else. So my dad was coming to visit me, and of course this was maybe 3 years in my sentence, and I still hadn't got my education figured out. So kind of once my dad came to visit me, I talked him into it. I was like, look, man, I'm in the hole 24 hours a day. I got nothing to do but go to school. So come on, man, just pay for my class. So sure enough, he signed me up for University of Colorado. Then I went to Penn State. And in the federal system, their education system is really kind of crazy, because the director of education would come through the hole and she would pass out these little like mimeograph papers, like, search for the word in a paragraph, and like ball is spelled B-A-L-L, like these really horrible things. So when she came by my window, I said, hey, how do I test out for college exams? And she says, oh, you need special permission to get your college work. But what she didn't know is I had a whole stack of my college books right next to me on the desk, and she just didn't see them. And she says, you can't do any college work until you get permission. But in the system, you can just get them mailed in. So I was like, man, I already got my stuff mailed in, so whatever, I'll just talk to you when I get out. So after 6 months in the hole, I could complete about 8 courses. And then by the time I got out of the hole, I kind of caught her down in the housing unit. I said, hey, I'm ready to have you proctor my exam, so how do we go ahead and do that? And she wouldn't proctor them, she just said no. And then, so finally, every time she came through my unit, I would jam her up and say, hey man, can you proctor my exams? And then finally she's like, Mr. Van Velzen, what are you trying to pull? It's like, literally, I'm literally trying to get you to proctor my exams. And she just wouldn't do it. And she just said no. At this time, I kind of had a girlfriend who is not really my girlfriend, but she was visiting me a lot. So I told her the whole problem. And she just went on fire. So she called this director of education every day, many times a day. She called director of DOC in Washington, D.C., like all these people she was calling. And then finally the director of education came to me. And I don't know if any of you have seen that Stephen King movie, Thinner, and like the white man's curse. So this is like the white woman's curse. And she told me, Mr. Van Velzen, you got to get your girlfriend to stop calling me. I don't think I will. So sure enough, I got my exams proctored. But it's just amazing because the story is, shouldn't you be excited that this guy wants to better himself and go to school? But that's not the way it is. So, and that's just one example. I have like 50 more examples of my biggest roadblock every time for my education was the education department. So I did it all in spite of them, not because of them. And that's really what I'm trying to change.
Well, I came out, as David said, in 2007. I came out in 2007. Things were a lot different then. I really didn't have any barriers or impediment by the system placed in front of me. I was very lucky. I think sometimes that being an attorney, former attorney, there was a little bit of they were concerned about the kind of problem I could raise. I heard that many times. I was told, don't practice law. And I didn't really have an intent of doing that, but it was pretty obvious that if I started talking in terms of this doesn't fit with DOC policy, procedure, or whatever, that I'd be on the first chain to the eastern part of the state. And so I really can't say that there were specific things, but I think a lot of times I could see the mental game was being played. And there was a particular CO that he was very rigid, very strict with everybody, but he seemed to have kind of an interesting game with me, that we were still allowed to wear civilian clothes in the Department of Corrections when I was inside. And I had a pair of blue jeans that I couldn't do the prison pants. So as long as I wore my red shirt, I could wear, my boss said I could wear my jeans up to my work position as an instructor. And he took issue with that. And so what he did, he tossed my bunk one day and he found my very neatly folded prison-ish pants. And he said, he called me in, he just looked at me like, I've got you now. And I said, so, Sergeant, what's the problem? He goes, who did you buy these off of? What are you doing in terms of selling stuff? I said, nothing. Those are mine. He said, well, what are you wearing now? I said, my blue jeans. Well, you can't wear those to work. And I could just see that he was trying to set me up for either a trip to the hole or a trip across the state. And I just stood my ground. And I was very fortunate that he just couldn't he couldn't make his argument that I had somehow stolen prison property. And I saw that on several occasions. And when I finally left the institution, I didn't have LFOs, I didn't have fines, I was going home, I was unsupervised. I was going to be left alone. And when I was doing my counselor exit, the young lady that was doing my extake, I guess, or outtake, looked at me and finally said, I don't know what to do with you. I've never had anybody that doesn't have fines, doesn't have supervision. And you know what? That's the worst thing I ever heard in my life. That's been an inspiration. You mean to tell me you've never seen somebody come out of a prison, this prison, in your experience, that doesn't have fines, doesn't have restitution, and isn't under supervision by the Department of Corrections? That should be an embarrassment, not a sense of wonderment. So, as I said, I had business I had to take care of in Kentucky with my family and our farm. But when I came back, I'm with her. I'm pissed about the way this system operates. It's designed to fail. It fails the notion of public safety. Because if you're recycling back folks like JJ who've been angry and he sees the light, and you're recycling people that don't see the light, there's going to be a lot of folks hurt in the process. Not to mention the person that just isn't getting it. So that's how I can't tell you how fortunate I am. I'm an exception. I have incredible privilege. But with privilege should always come responsibility. And that's what I do. That's why I do what I do. And I want to see this thing changed before I have my next heart attack. So, here you go.
One of the things, the challenges that I faced was I had been incarcerated, and over a period of time, just missing my family, my friends, the life that I had prior to, they told me that I was diagnosed with clinical depression. You think? I'm here, right? So with that being said, once they told me I was diagnosed with clinical depression, what is the next step? At 16 years old, I had my first heart attack. I was diagnosed with hypertension, also known as high blood pressure, which is hereditary. For me, both of my parents had it, so of course I ended up with it. But anyways, inside, so being diagnosed while there with clinical depression, okay, so I'm feeling this way, I'm crying, I don't know what's happening to me, I've never had this feeling, I can't breathe, my throat is closing up. I went to tell somebody the symptoms that I was experiencing. Go lay down, we'll be back to check on you. I passed out, I woke up 3 days later in the infirmary. My blood pressure was 216 over 117. Right, so with that being said, they missed a big thing. I could have died in their hands because now I have all of these issues and I need my medications. You've diagnosed me with something else, so everything else is going wrong in my body internally, but we're not addressing it, nor have you sent anybody to address it. You did, but it was 3 days later. So for me, and trying to manage your feelings, and they're saying, okay, well, no, you can't go to, for me, I'm one of those people, even after, I was able to experience and learn and grow and do things on my own. So I went to a naturopath, I went to sliding fee, went to Bastir, and now I got all these naturopath medications and teas, and I'm doing great, excellent. I don't have to be on any medication that makes me zombie out or whatever it is. Don't knock it because people do need it. But if you're going to diagnose somebody with your professional expertise in this area, don't diagnose me and then leave me hanging. I'm like, okay, I'm really show you crazy now because you haven't attended to my needs. If you're telling me that this is my issue and these are the symptoms and these are the side effects and these are the causes, what's next? So you're going to leave me in a situation where I can harm myself or my cellmates? That's not very smart. So for me, that was my roadblock, as getting the mental health services that I needed in order to feel good about myself, in order to go forward, in order to make different decisions. So that was really a lack. Or if it was okay, go to the infirmary, then you wait for 2 days for your medications to arrive. Even when you're being discharged. Well, I heard somebody say they got theirs for 30 days. No, what I didn't. I got mine for 5 days, which ended up didn't last because when I got out the first time, remember, I went right back because I stole a ride on the bus. So then I had to wait another 3 days to get the medication again. So I think when we're talking about that, the nurses and the infirmary, the doctors, everybody who comes in, we have to look at it different. If you're expecting people to meet your expectations, and if you're expecting people to live up to your diagnosis, then I'm going to hold them accountable to, whatever you're saying I need to take to fix this. It's your responsibility to get it to me, right? So I think and that was my roadblock. And then now, like I said, once I've been released, I don't have those issues anymore. I do everything naturally, but I can do that because once I got out, somebody gave me the tools to navigate it myself. And now I'm healthier. My blood pressure is controlled. If I'm depressed, I don't know it anymore. I don't take any medication. I'm happy, and I fight in this business. So I think that's one of the things that was a roadblock, is the health care that we get when you're incarcerated.
Yeah, getting sick in prison's scary. They'll let you die in there. For me, this is funny. Sue, my friend Sue out here, like, sometimes she looks at me crazy when I talk about just not really having roadblocks, right? She asked me, what are your roadblocks, JJ? And I'm like, I don't really have any roadblocks, right? But they're there. I just haven't experienced them fully yet. And I did finally kind of run into a roadblock, but because I have created such a huge network, I was able to go around. And for me, that was housing once, because when I had that 9 months halfway house, and then I moved in and rented a room from my cousin, right, in her house, and then I moved into another private owned house with a bunch of other students, and so once I finished up and graduated at Highline and going on to Olympia, I started looking a little bit early, and I got a couple just flat out felony, nothing, and so I started getting a little bit nervous. But like I said, I have created this huge network, and so I just started calling people, and they're like, hey, go try these apartments. And so the first apartment that I actually applied for, I got. So one of the things that I can tell, and this is my experience, right? Probation for me has been easy because I'm doing what I'm supposed to do and more than what I'm supposed to do. I don't want to use drugs. I've been clean for over 11 years now. I don't have that desire, so I'm not struggling with that, right? And so I don't worry about UAs. It's not even an issue for me. I'm a student. I've been doing what I'm supposed to do, and so my POs have left me alone. But one of the things about that, though, is like my first PO in the halfway house, and I don't know if any of you know her, was Anna Johnson from the federal. And so she's in this transition community, right? And she believes in transition. She supports us. And then my next PO was Jeff Robeson, how I met Jeff was at one of these community partners and transition solutions for King County, right? And I was there representing Highline, and he was chairing the meeting, and I'm like, hey, are you my PO, right? So, and he's still my PO, and when I travel or anything, he doesn't even sweat me, right? He's, oh yeah, okay, just tell me before you go, whatever, JJ, and so, and it's just because I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing and more. But I know at some point one of these roadblocks for a job or for something, right? One of these background checks or something will be the reason why I don't get it. But I also look at it this way, right? That if you're going to judge me, then I don't want to work for you anyway. Or I don't want to do that. So I'm not, that kind of stuff. It just, I use it as a filter, right? So that's what I got on that one.
Thank you for sharing. This will be the last questions before the audience question and comment portion. It's kind of a toughie, but if you could wave a magic wand right now, what would be the first thing that you would change about the current criminal justice system?
Sorry, you're going to get the legal opinion here. The first thing I would change about the criminal justice system is prosecutorial power. It's so out of control in the United States, it's not even funny. Prosecutor, in my case, and he's a very nice guy, we were very congenial. I had a choice of either pleading guilty to one charge or 72 counts. And if I pushed 72 counts, he was going to go full 48 months. And you know what? I took the gamble. I said, nope, we're not going to do it that way. And it was proven wrong. And I cost the state $32,000 a year for 2 years. A person who committed the similar financial crime as mine, because she cooperated in a different way and was the former mayor of SeaTac, she got home detention. And that illustrates what my attorney said. Now, my attorney at the time was Cyrus Vance Jr. He's the Manhattan District Attorney. And when we finally settled on where I was going and for how long away I was going, he looked at me and said, you know what the good news is, Zach? I said, no, I don't see any good news here, Si. He said, the good news is you're not black. Okay? Now, Cyrus Vance is the Manhattan District Attorney. He was a very prominent defense attorney, white-collar criminal defense professor at my alma mater, and he recognizes it. He recognizes the bias in the system, and we have got to take control over the bias that we have and the prosecutorial power. And one last thing, there shouldn't be a person in the United States. I have a son who just graduated from the University of Mississippi School of Law. He's a public defender. Today was his first day in Jefferson County, Kentucky, which is Louisville. And he was amazed at what happens. There is no representation in so much of our country for adequate defense to go up against prosecutors who have every tool and power in the book. If you don't have money, you're screwed. That's the bottom line. So, prosecutorial power and more money for public defenders.
So I'll say a big plus one on that. And also the structure underneath it too, which is not only do you have passionate prosecution, you also have the sentencing guidelines underneath that. So one of my favorite examples in Holland, they closed 19 prisons because they legalized drugs in a way, but also they had drugs as a medical issue, not a criminal issue. And then rehabilitation became a big mantra for what they did. When they closed 19 prisons, that's thousands of people back in society, but being treated and not punished. And they're pretty progressive over there, so maybe we can pick up on that.
Let's see, a magic wand to fix the justice system. I agree with the two comments I've heard earlier. For me, two things come up for me. The first one is rehabilitation has to start upon arrest. It has to be a seamless system, you know, and that takes cooperation by the county and the state, and of course the federal system. So to me, you know, it being a matter of social justice. So in order to help the people who have made a mistake, you have to start at the very beginning, and I believe we have to demilitarize our police force. I mean, there's just no way you can go to war with your own people. The drug war, the war on this, the war on crime. You just can't do it. You have to, and it goes to the shooting policy that leads to all these people getting killed. I mean, so you know, there's a number of things that need to happen. But to me, if you something as big as rehabilitation is starting upon the handcuffs going on, that's going to require a community. So that in and of itself is be a major paradigm shift. And so I really would look forward to something like that happening. But to me, it's the shooting policy that's really irritating me right now. You know, there's no way to end all these shootings if the cops can shoot you when they're afraid. You know, it's an inherently dangerous job. You shouldn't be able to shoot out of fear. You should be able to just take one for the team, I guess. So with that,
I think what I'd like to see is to have the criminal justice system focus more on like reducing crime, right? Instead of sort of maintaining some of the systems of power that exist, right? We have people in power as judges, as attorneys, as prosecutors, even as defense attorneys. The more crime there is, right, the more job security there is in that. We have prisons that are located in rural areas, and those are the primary economic drivers in those rural areas. If we do like Amsterdam did, and we close down those prisons, we have economic hardship in these areas, right? And so there's a lot of political momentum to keep those prisons going. And those prisons only keep going if people continue to feed back into the system. We have racial inequity, and we have people that are placed in prison to take away some of those civil rights, right? They're denied the right to vote. And so on one hand, you have a civil rights movement that occurs, and then you have a pushback right after that. And you start to have these prison populations explode right after that, right? And why is that we do that, right? Because it helps maintain these systems of power instead of actually trying to reduce crime. Well, we look at for example, like what reduces people's likelihood of going back to prison. You know, if we look at education programs, prison education and post-prison education programs, most of those programs have recidivism rates of like 5 to 7%, right? 5 to 7% of the people who go through those programs go back to prison, right? And so they're demonstrated as effective ways to keep people going back to prison, but that's not what these systems are designed to do, right? They're designed to maintain these systems of economic and social power that exist.
I think I wish that the system was more rehabilitative. That's what it focused on, and also more individualized, right? So everybody has different needs for rehabilitation. Some is mental health, their addiction. There's a lot of things. So I wish they just went through everybody in one pile and shuffle them through and send them out, because what works for one doesn't work for everybody else.
One thing that I'd probably want to, if I had a magic wand that I would want, my voice is louder, it carries. I have a hearing loss and 60% left. So at work, everybody's like, Michelle, inside voice, inside voice. I'm like, what? Inside voice. Oh, no. So, yes. One of the things I'd want to see, so for me, I remember when I was going through, court and all that stuff, and I walked in, they're like, okay, are you eligible? Do you have any money? What do you work? What do you do? Whatever, right? So I said, I'm indigent. I mean, I get food stamps. I'm indigent. And so, okay, bring us your food stamp card and prove that you're indigent, and then you'll be eligible for a public defender. Okay, so I was eligible for a public defender because I'm indigent, but while I'm incarcerated, I got all these interest rates going up in fines. If I told you I was indigent when I came in here and you ain't giving me no job, no money, what makes you think I got money to pay these fines when I'm out? I said I was indigent, right? So I think that would be one of the things that I would want them to look at, because I'm like, again, or even with public defenders, one thing I don't like is I go in, it's rush time, right? And he goes, oh, I didn't have time to review your case. I just got it today, but you're guilty of such and such, such and such, and so you need to plead guilty, because probably 9 times out of 10 you're not going to win. Okay, well, shit, sign me up. Sorry, because that fear of you're not going to win, they're going to find you guilty, it's probable cause, all that stuff. So what I would want to see is history behind a case. Don't tell me you just got my case 5 minutes ago and then you're telling me what I need to plead guilty to. You need to study this. Or not only do you need to study this, but you need to study me as a person. Where did I come from? What do I have to lose? If I was your family member, would you make the same decision right now? So I would want to see those things change. The decisions that are made when you're talking about if the system knows you don't have any money when you come in here, why are you imposing this interest? I get a pink and white slip every day, but I think my LFOs are down to like $72,000 now. And every couple, you know, my money a little funny. I have 3 adult children. The baby, who is the 19-year-old, she's in college right now, so my money's kind of going out. It's paid $3,000 in tuition. You know, I'm like, okay, what's going on here? So, but in the meantime, what happens is I gotta pay this in my, it happened just recently. Sue is my friend too, and she'll tell you, because I was calling everybody, hey, you guys, guess what? I need a ride. Because my LFOs, I was late, and they suspended my driver's license. I got pulled over, probable cause. For what? Okay, all right. Okay, by the way, your driver's license is suspended. For what? Oh, you're late on your LFOs. So guess what happened? So I was late on my LFOs, and then my driver's license was suspended. So, and then I got caught driving. So that was another $400 ticket. And I had, and then I got a fine because I have to have an SR22. So it's just like, here we go again. It's repeating the cycle. Now I'm accruing more fines. Then because I violated, I had to sit on house arrest, which is $192 per week. This is my income. I'm telling you right now, I don't have what you're asking for. You knew this from the beginning. So how do we end up with these numbers and these penalties? So that would be something that I would want to see the system, the criminal system, to look at. Yeah.
So I really think that we kind of have to understand that it's really an economic issue, you know, a socio-economic issue. We have in America, you know, an industrial prison complex that's a system of oppression, right? And so when people say that the system isn't working, no, you're wrong. The system's working exactly how it's designed to work.
That's right.
Right? And so it has to do with that. And so if I had a magic wand, I would probably go back to the emancipation when the prison industrial complex was created to re-enslave emancipated slaves to rebuild the South. I mean, if you want to get serious, and I'd go back then and give the promise that was made, 40 acres and some mules, and because, you know, back in that time in America, freedom was in property, you know, if you own property and stuff. So yeah, you know, and so I would go back and hit the magic wand there and start teaching people their real history of their country, and, you know, just all these different things, because that's where it's all at. It's all in education. It's in knowledge. That's the only way we're going to be able to push these systems of oppression and bend them towards justice. And that's how we have to do it. That's some of the work that I'm involved now with me and Michelle with Civil Survival. What we're doing to help in that, and I'm just giving a little plug here, so is our mission is to educate, motivate, and liberate formerly incarcerated individuals. And so what we do in our workshops is we do a little civics lesson, and then we teach people how to talk to their legislators concisely in 3 minutes, because that's the only time you're going to get to try to make that connection. And then we put together game changer groups where we actually are in the communities and talking to our legislators, our city council people, and trying to make some systemic change, right? Because that's really what's going to have to happen, you know. And I want to encourage anybody out here in this audience who hasn't watched the documentary 13 to watch that, and it'll give you an understanding. If you open your mind, you got to open your mind. We got to be open-minded and not believe that, you know, because we're all colonized mentally in America, right? And so open your mind to those truths of that, and get, you know, empathy. We have to start having some empathy for people, and create some change in this country. Because if we don't address this capitalist, out of control capitalism is what I call it, then we're doomed as a society in the end anyway, right? So yeah, that's where it's at.
Awesome. I'm going to open up the floor to anyone, any member of the audience that would like to. Yes. You know,
So I feel so passionate about all the, every single thing that everybody said and I'm constantly behind, and I've always wanted to do something, and I'm like most followingist, white Bretist, like white privilege, whatever, and I know there's things that we can do. It's not just, it's not, and you don't have to have been in prison to help people that have been in prison. Understand that getting back to society is better for society. So I know people up to you, if you can, please come to the prison scholarship or like,
and I'm just gonna go ahead and restate the question a little bit for the audience. No. She's just asking, what can we do, people who have not been incarcerated, to help support these causes that have been so well outlined by our panelists?
I look a lot at the work that I do from some of the gay and lesbian liberation movement, and I think about the importance of coming out and the change of the social narrative. These policies that we have are supported because there is this social narrative about what incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people are, right? They're a threat, they're a danger, they're another, right? And so even though we organize to try to change public policy, there's this force pushing back on that. And politicians maintain their power because there is this scary other group that they're protecting everyone from. And that's how they maintain power, right? And so one of the critical things you can do as an ally is to go back home and say, oh, I went to this panel and there were all these like formerly incarcerated people doing all these things in their lives, right? And it helps change that social narrative one person at a time, which is what really happened in the gay and lesbian liberation movement, is that, we spread that out. We came out, we shared our stories. People, allies, shared the stories of really who we are as people. So that's really important. And that not only helps change some of these policies and reduce the barriers to us coming out and our brothers and sisters coming out, but also those people who are incarcerated right now who are getting out, they're internalizing that same social narrative about what an incarcerated or formerly incarcerated person is. And if you go out and you change that social narrative one person at a time, one friend at a time, then they are also likely to have that hope of transforming their lives. They're likely to just see that spark of what could be different in their life. And like when I did research on hope, it didn't matter if people knew how to get to that goal, just that they knew that their life could be different. And that's what reduces reincarceration. One of the things that reduces it. So I'd say that's one of the things that you can do as an ally.
That was a good question. I've been sitting here trying to think of an answer, and one of the things that comes up for me is, there are a number of nonprofits in every county and every state, and I'm in a county and a state where there's just so much happening right now. But here you're from Washington, Seattle, I suppose. So I mean, I would hope that you would consider volunteering for some of these groups. Research, find one that coalesces with your belief system, or that you just feel, something that you feel a connection to, and volunteer. It's what we, in this nonprofit world, we're volunteer dependent, and everybody wears multiple hats, and we wear ourselves out, and we call our friends from other states to come hang out and, do what we can, So I'm hoping you would consider volunteering as well.
I'll say a plus one on that too, because even in this audience, I see 5 or 6 people that volunteer for us, and even somebody that volunteered her first day today, she's in the audience. She's had to come and check it out. So nonprofits are weird because either we raise a lot of capital, but being a nonprofit, it's hard to raise capital, or we have a lot of people that want to help out. And there's a million things that you can do. Just find one that resonates with you and help out.
I'll just say one thing: hold politicians accountable. They make the laws. They do it in a vacuum. In King County alone, we were talking about LFOs, legal financial obligations. There's $450 million in uncollected LFOs. They will never be collected. The Senate Law and Justice Committee is headed by a gentleman named Patton. His children run a collection agency. Guess which they specialize in? Collecting LFOs. Hold politicians accountable. It's the number one thing we need to do. There's going to be an election in November. There's going to be 2018. And if people who have a conscience don't turn out, don't talk to me about what a terrible creep the President of the United States is. Got nobody to blame but ourselves. So, politicians listen, and they don't like heat.
I agree. So it's about, I sit on many different, oh my gosh, I think, wow, like Zach said, we can get so burnt out when you sit on so many different organizations and different boards, and I sit on tons. During the day, I'm a funding advisor at Highline College, and even there, I sit on lots of boards. And I think that what is important for us is getting collectively with like-minded people. And I think that if you really think about it, you may have some. For me, I know I got more involved. Why? Because before I did great. I had a home. I had I drove a BMW. I still own my timeshare in the Bahamas, but it doesn't mean nothing because I can't enjoy it. I can't afford to get to it. You know. So I think when you it's about getting with like-minded people, and if it affects your family members, how does that make you feel if your family member had to go through something like that? And so for me, like I said, when I didn't really it didn't really piss me off until I was impacted. And you don't necessarily have to be impacted in order to help, because there's somebody around you who's been impacted. I was incarcerated with women who were homemakers, whose husbands had great jobs, and life happened and they made a mistake, and to this day they don't even know where their children are. That's scary. I have 3 amazing grown adult children, and I cannot imagine where my life would be if I didn't have any idea where my kids are. So just think about those people that are impacted. And if you truly function from a place of strength, empathy, compassion, and purpose, and when you analyze and when you look at what your values and your morals are, then that can help you determine what direction you need to go in. Nobody can make that decision for you. But like you said, so when you're making that statement, how can I help? Oh, there's lots of ways. We can put you to work, right? We can put you to work. So yes, get involved. Mobilize your community members, your friends. Like you said, we have to spread the word just by word of mouth. You know, even being the work that I do, I couldn't do it by myself. So I had to find like-minded people who have the same purpose, same goal, that was willing to help us get to make, that we can make a difference.
So I kind of like what you said, owning your privilege and everything like that. And so your privilege is power, right? And so somebody said something about being responsible with your privilege up here. So, use that privilege to help, right? And I think that's that political piece as well. But we did a little civil survival thing at a synagogue, right? And there was a gentleman there. He's all, "How can I help?" Right? "How can I help?" And we're like, "Well, what do you do? What can you do?" And he was I can't remember if he was a math teacher, but anyway, it's something to do with math. And now he is in the reentry. He's teaching math at the reentry program at South Seattle Community College, right? And so, maybe find your strength, right? And figure out how you can contribute. It might not be that you own a business and you can give, formerly incarcerated people jobs, It might be that little piece. You could tutor somebody, whatever you can do, But I think the real power is, though, in your voting power as well, too. I think that's so important, because that's where we make the change, is that political change. If you're interested, shameless plug, civilsurvival.org, right? That's our website, yeah. and you just, civilsurvival.org, get a hold of us. We do workshops, we do all kinds of that around political organizing and stuff. So if you're interested in that, maybe you have in your neighborhood, in your district over there, maybe there's somebody that we need to get out of there that's in the way, right? That's not helping the cause. And so you can help out that way. So that grassroots political involvement is huge.
think I'm going to make it simpler. Just really help fill these rooms. Get people involved to open their minds to change.
Yeah, I'll have you go in the front.
I'm going to say real quick, because just yesterday I was at Monroe, and we had a group, including Dan Satterberg, and some of the inmates inside, as well as some of their mentors that are coming in, brought up this exact topic, and that they felt the solution is to create mentors that are on the inside, so when they get out, they can talk to the youth because they relate with them. Right? I mean, they look like them, they are them, to teach them that this is not a path they should follow, and that they should, be able to help them get through their history, right? So, I mean, it's a seed, it's just starting, but it's great to hear that people are recognizing that this needs to be addressed when people are young, and probably the good people to help them understand how to deal with that and put it behind them are guys that have already been through that.
And really quick, just before the next person answers that, I'm just going to repeat the question. How she asked? I'm sorry if I oversimplify, but how do we bridge the gap between communities, particularly communities of color, and people who are incarcerated who have become invisible to communities outside of those communities of color, or even to that community itself?
I'm going to piggyback off of what he said. I agree. Mentors. It's some of the work I do is I go and I mentor guys into say certifications so they can come out and be responsible members of the community. Could be helpers and givers. Trying to help youth. That's a tough one. I work a little bit with youth, and I believe that there's a big movement in California right now to get ex-gang members involved with gang intervention. It's getting the people that were at the core of the problem and turn them into problem solvers. And to me, that's the thesis of all the work I do. You have to get people that were in. You have to get people that were in that population who have succeeded to mentor them through it. Those are the most. I mean, they're not the only types of people that could help that population, but that's what comes up for me. If it requires, getting people that have succeeded and that someone they can relate to. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's kind of what came up for me.
I totally get what you're saying. I as a funding advisor, like I said, in higher education, I work in White Center, and I run a program over there, which is the early childhood education program that I went and I asked what was the need in that community because we wanted to bridge that gap in the community. And so when the law changed around the child care laws, if you own your daycare, and so in that community, there's the majority of that community that I work with out there is refugee immigrants, Somali, Arabic speaking students. So what we did is we wanted to bridge that gap as far as being inclusive. So if we're going to be present in communities, then we have to be present wholeheartedly. So we were able to go in, we now provide classes in White Center for our, we do support, my caseload, we do support undocumented students, refugees, and immigrants. But one thing that I did have noticed is we had to create a safe place for these conversations to take place, because a lot of the in that community, a lot of them, the students now, even the youth, a lot of them are the breadwinners in the families. And like you said, with when domestic violence takes place in the home and things like that, of course, culturally, those aren't things that they can talk about. So we have partnered with the YWCA in White Center, who have been amazing in helping us bridge that gap between the youth and the community. Not only with the youth and the community, but with their parents as well. There was a lot of things around, they don't do banking for cultural reasons. There's a lot of reasons why they don't do banking. Now we've been able to say, okay, how do we bridge that gap? Now we've been able to create Muslim banking, you know. So I think when we provide the resources to the population that we're serving, then we get better outcomes. So again, we have to be inclusive. So for you in your situation, you have to do peer support. There is right now, there's a lot of gang stuff going on within the Somali community, and I hear them talking about, they're like, well, how do you even know how to say that word? You're not, you know, things, and they get mad because they're like, you're saying that word, you're not even from here. You see what I'm saying? So I think that they're adapting to a lot of other things because they can't have those conversations at home. It's not to be spoken about. But what's important is for us is to provide a safe place for the youth to have those conversations. And Starbucks is doing a lot of awesome work around that we've partnershiped with, and in making those and helping them understand that it's not your fault, but what the big thing I noticed, it is a cultural difference. And so it's like, how do we meet the need without overstepping our bounds? Yay! Yes. Yeah, we also have Passage Point through YWCA, who's doing a lot of work with that as well. So oh, see? Okay, so you kind of know a little bit about, but it has its issues, you know what I mean? But being present in me, in my passion and being impacted, they can do their thing, but when I'm there as a community partner, oh, I go in regardless to what they say. I want to meet the need of the people, not what the need of your funders and whoever else is telling you to do, because your funders are going to tell you whatever, but are you really impacting the lives that you talk about that you're doing? I'm done.
Okay, I'm sorry to cut people off, but we do have to wrap it up here just for the to respect the Atlas Workplace people. But I invite people, the audience members that still have questions, to continue talking with the panelists. And I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists. Your stories are amazing. Thank you for sharing. And thank you to our audience members.